Welcome to SPAN. For those of you that have been to SPAN before, welcome back to SPAN. My name is Mark Davis. I'm on the trust team at D.A. Davidson Company, and I'm honored to be this year's president of SPAN. We do have 40 people this time that have never been to SPAN, so that is a record. So if you're new to SPAN, if you'd please stand up so we can welcome you, please stand when you can. Special thanks to Teresa Massengill and Regina Bellady today for arranging for the Nesholm family to speak to us. We really appreciate that. They're our gold sponsor for SPAN, and without them, this program today wouldn't have come together. So thank you to Regina and Teresa. Next, we have our sponsors of SPAN. Without SPAN sponsorship, we would not be having SPAN. So if you feel like it's a good thing for you to potentially sponsor, please let me know, but hold your applause until we're through our sponsorships. Our only gold sponsor that I'm sure will change over time is Bloodworks Northwest. Well, I'm sure we'll migrate up from silver sponsorship, some of us. But gold sponsorship, Bloodworks Northwest, Clark Nuber, Columbia Bank, D.A. Davidson, Del Prado Philanthropy, Ernst & Young, Evergreen Plant Services, Filament Advisors, Goldman Sachs, Helsel Fetterman, Pratt Legacy Advisors, U.S. Private Bank Wealth Management, Wellspring Group, and Whittier Trust. So if you please give all our sponsors a big hand, I'd appreciate it. So now we're going to start the conversation. So what I'm going to do is introduce Erika, if you can come up to the front here together. And she will then introduce her parents, John and Laurel Nesholm. Welcome, Heidi. For nearly 3 years, Erika has served as the executive director of the Nesholm Family Foundation, leading the multi-generational commitment for supporting health and human services, education, and the performing arts. Actually, if you'd like to come up too, yeah, so we'll all be up there together. Thank you. Prior to that role of the foundation, Erika was a classics professor and taught at several colleges, including Georgetown University and College of William and Mary. She holds a PhD in classics, a master's in education policy, with a focus on arts education, both from the University of Washington. Her leadership role today reflects on the lifelong professional and personal commitment to the humanities and the arts. Erika also serves on the boards of ACT Theater, Arts Corp, Photographic Center for Northwest, Community Advisory Board of Classics King FM. Please welcome John and Laurel Erika Nesholm to SPAN.
Well, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here today, and I'm actually going to ask my parents to give their own introduction. So just a few words about how you got to this position that we're in right now. Starting with Mom, Laurel Nesholm.
Okay. I'm Laurel Nesholm. Excuse me. How I became a philanthropist. Well, I think John will be explaining that in our brief intro. I was a French teacher for 5 years. Can still continue to speak French, read French, listen to it, and I'm a Francophile. I'm not sure what that has done to help me in this position, but it gives me a great outlet when I don't have to worry about nonprofit organizations. Yes, and then currently I'm on the Seattle Symphony Board, and over the years I've served in many volunteer capacities. Seattle Opera Board, Epiphany Church, both in a little bit of grant making there as well as leadership. So I did get a little bit of experience in that field, but then I'll have John introduce himself.
So I'm John Nesholm. I guess my day job is as an architect with LMN Architects, and we've had the great pleasure of being involved in a large number of civic projects. I'm also on a number of boards, including being chair of the Seattle Opera Board, and I'm on the Seattle Parks Foundation Board, Friends of Waterfront Seattle, and actually various committees and boards of this club. So I've done a number of things in the community. all of which have been fabulous.
So I want to start with asking about the origins of the foundation. So what was the motivation for establishing the foundation in the first place, and the thinking behind the funding guidelines that we established?
Okay, well, I guess I need to give just a little bit of family history. Many of you may know the United Parcel Service was founded in Seattle in 1907. And my father spent his entire working career with UPS, starting in Seattle. He started actually on a truck and then worked up his way up to managing the Seattle operation, and then was transferred to New York when I was about 3 or 4, and then worked his way up to the very senior levels of management in New York. United Parcel Service was wholly owned by its employees at that time, and at that time there was no such thing as stock options and that sort of thing. You could buy into the company at the price set by the board of directors. So one had to make a personal sacrifice in order to buy into the company, and once one did, one was obviously very committed. So that resulted, as UPS grew, into really a great success. My father then retired to the Northwest in 1972. Following me, I made up my mind I was going to move back to Seattle when I was 12. At the same year, I decided I was going to become an architect, so it was a big year for me. At any rate, he came back to Seattle, and he was really determined. He was a problem solver, and he was also determined to give back to the community that benefited him so much. And so he talked to us about this idea about starting a foundation. He wanted our approval, of course, and we, of course, wholeheartedly said yes, knowing nothing about what it meant. And then he wrote the guidelines, and the guidelines required a board of 3. I'm an only child, so it was me plus 2 outside directors. He wanted to meet the outside directors, and I got to choose them. I chose Dr. Ed Marcuse, a distinguished pediatrician from Children's Hospital and UW, and somebody I guess who a lot of you know, Joe Gaffney, who's an attorney in Seattle. So they were the beginning trustees, and they are still the trustees. Along the way, we've added Carol Lewis. And then he also came up with the guidelines, the focus, as was stated earlier, health and human service, education, and the performing arts in Seattle. He wanted to make sure he was giving back to the community that benefited him so much. And so the foundation was basically created through his will, and so in 1987, we gave our first grant.
And what did it feel like to suddenly have a foundation with your name on it, very publicly for the first time? So things changed. What did that feel like?
Well, it was actually quite scary. When John's dad had asked us about the foundation, of course it was a very abstract idea to us. It would be way off in the future, and then suddenly, he passed away rather suddenly, and we took a deep breath and said, okay, we've got to get going on this. Fortunately, we had some good advisors to help us. Joe Gaffney was able to put us in touch with somebody who had helped set up foundations. And she, her help was invaluable. But along the way, she had us meet with some experienced philanthropists, one of whom was Ned Skinner. And one of the things we asked him about was, we'd really like to be anonymous. Nobody knows who we are. We don't want our name out there like that, suddenly attached with money. And he said, no, do not be anonymous. That would be a very bad idea. He said, if your name is associated with it, you will get better grant requests, people will know you, and then ultimately it will benefit the whole community because they will recognize the work you do. And I guess over the years that has been proven to be true. We are a little more comfortable after 31 years now with this idea, but it was a real shock. In fact, one of my friends, when she first heard about it, said, well, I just don't know if we can be friends anymore. You're in a different category. No, I'm still the same person, and we are just people. So, no, it was a little frightening, I must say.
Do you have anything you want to add to that?
That's right.
So from the very beginning, we've had a pretty formal grant process, application process. Can you talk about how that came about, why the formal process and the rationale behind the way we've thought about our funding areas and the application process and decision-making process?
Okay, getting back to the, we had several day-long retreats with our board and our advisor, and collectively, we developed all of the sub-areas with, if you've seen our website and seen what our guidelines say, we developed those in the course of 3 or 4 days. As far as the process itself, we ask for a letter of inquiry, 2 pages, 12-point font minimum, 1-inch margins. It's amazing how many people ignore that, but it's very hard to read 8 points with a 1/2-inch margin. We've even been known to send those back. A 2-page grant application that we've created and a project budget showing income and revenue. That's step 1. And if those pass muster with our executive director, then the board will consider all of those. And depending on the category, we may have anywhere from 10 to 40 applications for a board meeting. Our board reviews those, and then we determine which ones we'll take to the next step and those that we will just stop right there. It often involves a site visit, especially for a new organization to us. And then once we get past the next step, we get documents for a full proposal, then it comes back to the board for a final decision. Let's see, what have I left out, Erika?
Our thinking behind why those 3 documents, the rationale for our process?
The rationale for our process. Well, we think that all organizations, when they submit a request, need to show their need for the money. You want to add to that?
No, I'll just add to that. We came up with a process, basically a grant application, which I think was based on one that was created by Philanthropy Northwest, if I
That is
remember
true.
correctly. So we really tried to make it simple for organizations so they wouldn't have to spend an undue amount of effort to apply, particularly in the case of, we can't fund everything, so some people will not be funded.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's been important to always get enough information to make the decision, but not so much, avoid getting information we don't need. If it's not helpful for
Precisely.
us for making the decision, why put anyone through the process of getting it?
Right, and the projected revenue and expenses is very important. Sometimes people will just put down one part. We need this money. If they don't have the expenses, why do you need it? You have to show us the need.
So I think the site visits are always a fun part of the decision-making process. It's always a good way to get to know the work of organizations, the people involved. So have you learned anything surprising along the way?
Well,
on the
many
site
things
visits?
surprising. For about 20 years, my colleague Diana Kelmer, she was our staff person, and I would make site visits regularly. And there are several things that we learned. One, is sometimes on paper an organization looks great. You go meet with them, they're not so great. And vice versa. Especially if it's a refugee organization, they may not be the most sophisticated at putting together their need, but we can see that there's something here we should investigate. And you discover these are really hardworking people. It's a great project, and yes, they deserve funding. We have learned so many things, a couple of amusing ones. I will not give you the details on one. It was with POCAN, People of Color Against AIDS Network. That was probably 30 years ago. One of the people we were to interview was a prostitute who had lots of interesting things to share.
She won't even tell me.
I won't tell him what we learned, but that doesn't matter. The very amusing one is Diana and I always tried to dress appropriately for some of these nonprofits, which is a little hard to do for two middle-class women who, like to look decent when you go out. But we would try to dress down a bit, and we never did succeed with that. But there was an organization on First Avenue that I think was around men with AIDS, but the only thing I remember about it was going in and we had to wait about 15 minutes for the executive director. And it was a bare bones office with folding chairs, and she had a desk, and she said, well, just sit over there until he's ready. So we sat down, and a number of men came in, and they said, where are the condoms? And she said, oh, they're under those chairs there, exactly where we were sitting. So we had these men pawing through these boxes saying, but where are the colored ones? I want the colored ones. And they would take hands full, and we thought, how can these men be so busy? So you never know what you will run into. Erika, I don't think you've had an opportunity to go on a very interesting one, but it would have been very nice if this woman had taken the boxes and moved them elsewhere, but no, we had.
But they got the money.
I don't remember. But no, seriously, the site visits are so important because that's where we can really see the leadership in action. We don't want to be entertained while we're there. Some people would like to put on practically a full meal for us, but no, we don't need any more food. And they should save all their money for their organization, not for courting us.
So moving on to highlight our three funding areas: performing arts, health and human services, and education. So I'm going to ask you to talk about our strategy within each focus area. Have there been any shifts in our priorities? And then ask you to highlight some particular grants that have been particularly meaningful, given a lot of joy. So starting with performing arts, can you describe our strategy within performing arts?
Our strategy within performing arts is to help the organization put productions on the stage. We are not going to tell performing arts organizations what to do. We're not going to say, we will give you the money if you perform this concert, this opera, whatever. That's not our job, that's your job. And we do, of course, the quality of the production needs to be high, and I think the arts organizations in Seattle do present works of high quality. We do performing arts, not the visual arts. We do small organizations and communities up to the major Seattle Opera, Seattle Symphony. We gave $3,000 a few years ago to a community organization that does a play every 2 years, and it really benefits that community. It was a great little play called Pickle, the Dog Who Loved to Read. So it was designed for children and families. It was a grand success, and I would swear that $3,000 made a huge difference to that organization. And right, and then up to the opera, which gets about $300,000 annually. So there's a whole range of grants we make. We don't fund every single arts organization because, well, some of them may not have the most compelling story to tell. Okay, do you want to add something, John?
Did you want to highlight a particular grant in performing arts that you wanted to?
Well, I think the ring has been very beloved to us, very important to our entire family. Our entire family goes to the ring. We've attended the ring since Seattle's first one in 1975, and so that's been a really important grant that we've been able to give to support something that has taken Seattle, beyond Seattle, really around the world in terms of reputation.
And health and human services, how would you describe our strategy in that area and any particular grants that you want to highlight there?
Well, in Health and Human Services, I think our strategy is really primarily to be responsive to what the needs are. And obviously, the big need right now is homelessness, and we do some things there, and we don't know any more than anybody else, but we do a little bit. But I will cite one very early grant that was really quite interesting. Through Ed Marcuse, he said, why don't you write to the King County Department of Health and see if there's anything they need. So this was really, really early on. And we did that, and they came back and said, we're going to do a pilot project for a school-based health clinic in Rainier Beach High School, and we have only enough funding for 50% salary for a nurse practitioner and 50% salary for a mental health specialist, and no money to do any renovations to create the appropriate spaces. So we said, okay, we'll help. And so we took that funding to 100% and did some minor remodeling to create spaces. And that was a pilot project, and it was controversial at the time because you can imagine birth control was a big issue, and it was all in the newspapers and so on, but we did stick through it. And the pilot project was a huge success. And that actually formed the basis for something called the Families in Education Levy. And that was passed, and it's been passed every time it's come up again. It resulted in a health clinic and It's resulted in a health clinic in every high school and every middle school in Seattle, and it's coming up again this fall, so please vote yes. And of course, it's expanded to do other things as well, so it's been a terrific success. So that was an early on interesting project that we did.
Excuse me, I will cite one that we did in 1991 that was for a new organization called Northwest Child. We got an application from a woman who wanted to start a daycare for children with developmental disabilities, and there was nothing like that in the city. And we went to meet with her. It was a great site visit, and we ended up funding her, and we thought, this woman has such a great idea, and it seems as though she's being realistic about it, has all her planning in place. Let's make a 3-year grant with descending amounts each year so she can be assured of continuity and perhaps attract other funds. It is still going today, and in fact, it's now branched out into 2 sites. But I think one thing that we felt good about was the ability to take a risk on a small grant and be nimble enough to do that. So, and we've had a couple of other situations like that. But every time I drive past that house, which is out on 85th, I think, she's still going. This is great.
So Performing Arts in Health and Human Services, our strategy has been pretty steady from 1987 until now. Education is the one area where we have shifted. So do you want to talk a little bit about how we have shifted and what we're doing now?
Early on, we gave grants to various projects that would come over the transom that seemed to be appealing to us and seemed to have the potential of doing good, and none of them amounted to a hill of beans. So 18 years ago, we decided to concentrate our education funding, and we did that in we picked middle schools, and I think you can imagine why we picked middle schools. It's the last chance to get caught up before high school, and not much interesting work was being done in middle schools. And we picked the 3 highest poverty, highest minority middle schools in Seattle, which would have been Denny and Mercer and Aki Kurosi.
No, it was Meany at the time.
Yeah. And then Aki Kurosi. At the time, Seattle School District was focused on literacy, so we decided to adopt that as our focus. And the project has changed over the years, but so what we do now, it's evolved. What we've been doing now for about the past 12 years, I guess, 10 or 12 years, is we fund a literacy coach / assistant principal, has the rank of assistant principal in each of the 3 schools. Because what we found out is that the assumption was in middle school, you already knew how to read. And you have kids coming in 2 to 4 years behind in reading, and there's nobody to teach them how to read. So we have a literacy coach that works with the language arts teachers in order to teach reading skills. And the other part of it is we partnered up with Columbia University Teachers College. They have a project called Readers and Writers Workshop, which is the only intervention that I'm aware of that has proven to be effective. So we send the literacy coaches and teachers to New York in the summer to get trained. We're sending 20 this summer. And then we have their people, they call them site developers, come to Seattle. They do 3 days in the fall and 2 days in the spring in each of the 3 schools. So in addition to that, we of course provide books and instructional materials and all the rest of it. But it has really been quite transformative. The achievements have been terrific. We have one, I think, star school that's really, I think, really dramatically closed the achievement gap. The other schools almost, and one school, Akikurosi, frankly, they have the toughest incoming kids, and so their kids make great progress, but it is honestly a tall hill. But I think people are surprised to know that 2 years ago, one of our schools, high poverty, high minority, had the highest 8th grade science scores in the entire city.
Because, of course, a literacy teacher also works with the science and the other teachers too, because reading is important in math and science in all topics.
Exactly. And the other thing is, I think everybody knows the real struggle in schools with African American boys. And there was a statewide study to see how African American boys were doing. And they identified all the schools in the state that had a high percentage of African American boys, and our 3 schools came out on top. So it's been huge, and it's been very, very rewarding to be involved in that project.
And do you want to talk about the middle school support project, the mental and behavioral
which
health?
is lovingly known as MSSP, which 2 of our board members actually met with Sound. It was Sound Mental Health at the time, to see what they could do to supplement the work of our middle school project, because as you all know, barriers to learning there are so many, whether they're family issues, substance, divorce, violence, just you name it. And out of that was created a project where each of the 3 schools has a social worker in there to work with the kids who are very, very troubled. And it has become such an asset to each of the schools that has helped with the test scores as well. But also at Mercer, the principal there is so excited about this project that he finds other funding somehow to add an additional person. And I think one of the other schools also has added another person. And of course, that's something we'd love to expand, not only within our school, but in the district. And I know a lot of schools would love it, because, this is one thing that we have learned from our work, is the stories out there we are so isolated from. It breaks your heart to hear what goes on in families and in schools and in this community. And so anything that can be done to help that is very rewarding.
I'm going to turn the tables a little bit. Erika, what have you done to further this work downward?
No. Oh, in the feeder schools. Oh.
Okay. Didn't know where you were going with that, but yeah. One of seeing all the success in the middle schools, but as you mentioned, students are coming in often far below grade level. So how much more exciting would it be if we could get those students to come in closer to grade level? So we had been talking for a long time about the dream of expanding into the elementary schools. And so in talking with the Satterberg Foundation, developed a partnership with instituting a similar kind of structure at the elementary school level that feeds into the middle school. So it's been a pretty exciting collaboration between foundations and the schools working closely together to make this expand. And if we can expand to the high schools, then that will be the real dream.
And after year 1 with the elementary schools, we happen to go to their year-end presentation. We always have a year-end for the middle school. And it was so exciting to see what is transpiring there. It was was pretty great.
Yeah, I admitted to mention one other factor that I think is attributed to our success in the middle schools is that we have monthly principal meetings in our office. And so that's an opportunity for principals to get together and coordinate. We call it our little R&D group because new ideas come up and we implement them, and they are largely successful. So that sharing of information, which is rarely happens between principals, has really also been a key to moving forward.
I think we have just a few minutes.
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of back up and ask a larger question. What has doing this work meant to you? What brings you joy in doing this work?
I've already mentioned a bit of it, but it's really been getting to know the community, the people in it, in the nonprofits who do work with passion and often with a low financial reward, colleagues in the nonprofits, the boards that I've been involved in, all the players in the community. It's been a huge education that I would have gotten nowhere else. And it's been a pleasure to work with our family. Erika is on our board. Our other daughter, Kirsten, is also on the board. And then the 3 outside board members have been such assets. We're just one big family, really. So those are some of the joys of it.
Well, I would agree with all of that, of course, but also add that it was really been terrific to be intellectually engaged with the issues of the community and be able to help in some small way. That's been extremely rewarding.
Right.
And for you?
For me, it means a lot to me to be able to do this work and carrying on my family's legacy, taking on this role when my mom retired, stepping into her shoes, big shoes to fill. But it's really an honor to be able to do this. And I would echo a lot of what you said. My favorite part of my job is always going out and talking to people who are so dedicated to making this community better in so many ways. That's always inspiring, and it's really an honor to be able to be part of that work and part of this community.
How was it to grow up in this family? Because I think you were about 14 when all this started. Do you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, it was it was a little mixed, honestly. Having some really mixed feelings about having your name be public in a way that I wasn't always comfortable with when I was 14 or 15. But at the same time, being proud of that too. So there was definitely a struggle there with knowing how to think about that, certainly as we all got a little more comfortable with that. And it shifted pretty dramatically for me when I took this on as my job. That makes it much easier somehow to integrate it into my whole life, professional life and personal way of thinking about my role. So yeah, mixed. But I would also say it was a real privilege to sit around the dining room table and have the conversations be about what's happening in the community and what can we do, what can the foundation do about that. So it just became sort of a natural part of my way of thinking about how to be part of this community, how to work in this community, how to give back to this community. It was never a question. It was just always part of the way of doing things.
Speaking of the way of doing things, I will confess that last night we got together just to talk about sort of, what are we going to say? And you shared a very interesting story about your grandfather and philanthropy from when you were 8 or 9, something like that. I had totally forgotten it, but he really set an example, I would say.
You
want to share that?
Sure, yeah. So for Christmas one year, when I was, let's say 8, for Christmas, both my sister and I got, as one of our presents, a gift has been given in your name to Seattle Children's Hospital, to a patient there. And on top of that, we didn't just do that, but we specifically thought of a gift that we were not going to get you and give this gift to someone else instead. And it was that second part, I think, that made it I felt that much more, because at that point, you're still thinking about what presents am I going to get for Christmas? And to know that one of them had been given to someone else who needed it more made a huge impression on me.
We have time for just a couple questions before lunch is served. Any questions from SPAN? Jen?
Hi, Jen Jacobs with U.S. Trust. I'm working with a new emerging family foundation, and they also have an interest in arts education, but they're not as plugged into the community, and we have a long history in our community here. They don't know as many people. In addition to the process that you put in place, the LOI, and then inviting proposals later and doing site visits and how that's important, that's all great. Any other advice for a new funder and how to vet prospective grantees?
Well, I'll give a couple of comments. Once you are out there and once you give a grant, it's amazing how the grapevine works. It is not a problem being discovered, I can tell you. But the other issue, I think, is, well, obviously focus your interest and decide what you want. And if there is some organization that you know that you favor and you think they can come up with a program, I think you could invite an application and then, and go from there. But I think having, well, the more focus you have and the more process you have, I would say the better.
The other part of that is to check out Philanthropy Northwest. That's the local group for funders, and you'll be connected with fellow funders, and you'll learn a lot more about what's happening in the community.
Well, that's an excellent point. I should have thought of that. Also, they also have interest groups, and I'm sure there's one in the arts, and so that's another way. And there's also funders in the arts, a national organization.
Grantmakers in the arts.
Grantmakers in the arts. Mm-hmm. And of course, there's also the Philanthropy Northwest has an annual conference. It's another great opportunity.
And Erika, you're part of a arts funders group in Seattle too.
So I think we'll start off with lunch now. Well, one more. Great.
I just was wondering, in your decision-making to give a one-time grant or an ongoing funding, is that from the request of the foundation, the request of the organization asking for a one-time or ongoing, or is that a decision that you all make to continue funding some programs? Like, how do you discern that?
Well, essentially, I think if there are any arts organizations in here, we are pretty consistent in arts funding because we are one of the few foundations now, we hope there will be others, who makes grants to the arts. We've started staying away from too many multi-year grants because during the Great Recession, we really had we were overcommitted, and it took a while to pay off some of those multi-year grants and then be able to go back to what we consider business as usual. It depends a bit on, sometimes we make that decision, and if we decide to do it, it's often, as I mentioned, a sliding amount each year. But typically, the requests are for a one-time only.
Thank goodness for Seattle, the Nesholms live here. Please give them a big round of applause.